Trump just detonated a diplomatic landmine. With the stroke of a pen, he slapped a 20% tariff on Canadian electric vehicles, a move he swore would protect American jobs. Instead, it just blew up the one supply chain Washington can't afford to lose: Canada's $3.9 billion nickel lifeline. That's the metal running straight from Sudbury, Ontario, across the border to Detroit's auto plants, fueling the very batteries America needs to power its EV future. And here's the kicker: Trump didn't carve out an exemption. No special deal for America's closest ally. Just a blunt tariff, hammering both Canadian exporters and US automakers in one reckless shot. Now Canada is fighting back, cutting off nickel, taxing exports, and redirecting clean metals to Europe and Asia. The fallout? Pricier batteries, weaker EV sales, and a US industry staring at its own self-inflicted wound. Stay tuned, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and keep watching. Trump's tariff wasn't just a policy blunder. It was a direct strike at the heart of America's EV supply chain. To understand how badly this backfired, you need to know the role nickel plays and why Canada has always been the quiet lifeline behind Detroit's electric future. Nickel isn't some throwaway commodity. It's the backbone of lithium-ion batteries, boosting energy density and making EVs drive farther on a single charge. Every Ford Lightning, every Chevy Bolt, every Tesla that rolls off the line depends on it. And guess who supplies the lion's share of high-quality, low-emission nickel to the United States? Not China, not Indonesia, but Canada, specifically Sudbury, Ontario, where miners dig up over 185,000 tons a year, feeding directly into US cathode plants. That's the Ontario-Detroit nickel artery, worth nearly $3.9 billion annually. And Trump just smashed it with a 20% hammer. The math is brutal. Arena's economic simulation ran the numbers, and the results are staggering. Tariffs at this level add anywhere from $230 to $1,020 per battery pack. That's not chump change. It's the difference between turning a profit and bleeding red ink. General Motors, already operating on razor-thin margins, sees its EV profitability shrink from 10.1% down to 8.3%. Sounds small? Multiply that across tens of thousands of units, and you're staring at losses in the hundreds of millions. By 2026, EV sales could fall by 94,000 units, all because of one man's tariff tantrum. This isn't just bad math, it's suicidal strategy. America already trails China in EV dominance, and Europe is sprinting ahead with aggressive green policies. Cutting off Canadian nickel is like strangling your own oxygen supply mid-race. The US needs allies with clean, reliable resources. Instead, Trump has forced Canada into a corner, and Ottawa isn't taking it quietly. Prime Minister Trudeau's government didn't flinch. Within weeks, Canada unleashed a four-part retaliation that turned Washington's tariff into a boomerang. Step 1. A 15% export tax on nickel specifically aimed at US buyers. That's not just a slap, it's a chokehold. American cathode makers now face higher costs on top of Trump's tariffs, creating a double squeeze. Step 2. Ottawa rolled out a carbon tracking mechanism. Why does that matter? Because Canadian nickel is among the cleanest on Earth, with a footprint of just 4.2 tons of CO2 per ton of metal. Compare that to Indonesia, where nickel belches out 36 tons of CO2 per ton. Europe's new carbon border tax, 115 euros per ton of CO2, makes that difference a deal breaker. Translation? Canada can redirect its nickel to the EU and South Korea, both desperate for low-emission metals, while US imports get stuck paying premium penalties for dirtier supply. Step 3. Ottawa poured $257 million into LFP battery development, a direct shot at US market reliance. By betting on lithium iron phosphate, Canada can build cheaper, cobalt-free batteries that cut Washington out of the loop. And Step 4. Canada dangled hefty tax incentives to lock in the Stellantis LG battery plant in Windsor, just across the border from Detroit. That plant alone ensures Canada isn't just a nickel exporter, it's a manufacturing hub with leverage over the entire North American EV market. The effects were immediate. By July 2025, Canada redirected $1.8 billion in nickel exports to South Korea and the EU. Shipments that once crossed into Michigan now sailed to Hamburg and Busan. Nickel exports overall surged 23%, but here's the irony: the United States was left out of the party. Germany and South Korea gained market share, while American automakers scrambled for dirtier, costlier alternatives. For US consumers, the fallout is just as ugly. Take the Ford F-150 Lightning. Before tariffs, the sticker price hovered around $69,000. After Trump's nickel chokehold, try $72,500, a number that makes gas-powered pickups suddenly look like bargains. Families weighing the cost of going electric now find themselves priced back into the arms of gasoline, the exact opposite of Washington's climate goals. And while the White House insists tariffs are about fairness, the reality is brutal. Canadian nickel is gone, European buyers are thrilled, and US automakers are stuck paying twice. First for tariffs, then for higher raw material costs. Investors notice, stock prices dip, confidence in the EV transition cracks, and all because one administration treated its closest ally like an enemy. But Canada's retaliation wasn't just economic, it was geopolitical theater. By aligning nickel exports with Europe's carbon rules, Ottawa positioned itself as the clean supplier of choice in a multipolar world. Brussels applauded, Seoul cheered, even Tokyo signaled interest. Canada went from junior partner in North America to a pivotal player in global EV supply chains, all in a matter of months. Meanwhile, Washington found itself boxed in. Three options remain on the table: exempt Canada from tariffs, hold the line and risk losing the nickel entirely, or adjust the rate downward to 20 to 25% to save face while easing supply chain stress. None are attractive. Exemption looks weak, staying firm looks suicidal, compromise looks desperate. And here's the twist. The longer Washington hesitates, the stronger Canada's bargaining hand becomes. Every ton of nickel rerouted to South Korea or Germany tightens the noose on Detroit's EV dreams. By winter 2025, America may wake up to find that its clean energy future is no longer made in the USA, but made in Windsor, Busan, and Hamburg. That wasn't the whole story, because Canada's clean nickel play came with another consequence, one that exposed the dirtiest secret of global EV production. And what happened next would shock everyone. So far, we've seen how Trump's tariff detonated America's nickel lifeline, and how Canada countered with surgical precision. But the story doesn't stop at economics. What unfolded next was a full-scale shift in the global EV chessboard, one that put the US on the defensive while Canada quietly rewrote the rules. Let's start with the environmental dimension, because that's where Canada turned a weakness into a weapon. For years, Washington boasted about its green transition, yet the US has been importing nickel from Indonesia and the Philippines. Metals so dirty they practically reek of coal smoke. Canada saw the opening and doubled down. By emphasizing that its nickel produces just 4.2 tons of CO2 per ton, compared to Indonesia's 36 tons, Ottawa made itself indispensable to Europe's climate agenda. Why does that matter? Because under the EU's carbon border adjustment mechanism, every ton of dirty nickel comes with an extra €115 penalty. Suddenly, European automakers could buy from Canada at a discount, or pay through the nose for Asian supply. Guess who wins that game? Not Detroit. And it wasn't just Europe. South Korea, already a battery powerhouse, jumped at the chance to secure clean feedstock. By the summer of 2025, Korean firms had signed multi-year contracts with Canadian miners, locking in supplies that once flowed freely into the US. Detroit's lifeline was now Seoul's treasure chest. Meanwhile, Wall Street began ringing alarm bells. Analysts at Barclays and Arena warned that if the US couldn't stabilize nickel access, EV production costs would spiral. Investors who once treated Ford and GM as safe bets now hedged toward European firms like Volkswagen and Korean giants like Hyundai. Confidence in the US EV market was bleeding out, not because of a lack of demand, but because of policy sabotage. And this is where the consumer side comes roaring back. You don't need to be an economist to understand what higher input costs mean. They cascade. Batteries get more expensive, vehicles get pricier, leasing deals dry up. By mid-2026, the average EV price in the US is projected to climb by $3,500 to $6,000. That's the gap between someone switching to electric or sticking with gas for another decade. For working-class families in Michigan or Ohio, that isn't a statistic. It's a roadblock. Gasoline suddenly looks like the cheap option. The irony? Trump's tariffs, supposedly about protecting American workers, may drive Americans back into gas-guzzling SUVs while Chinese and European consumers accelerate toward electric. That's not protectionism, it's regression. And while the US stumbles, Canada gains leverage. Ottawa's incentives for the Stellantis LG plant in Windsor weren't just about jobs, they were about control. That factory, sitting right across from Detroit, will produce batteries using Canadian-controlled nickel and Canadian-funded R&D. The symbolism is staggering. Detroit, the home of the American auto industry, staring across the river at a Canadian plant dictating the future of electric mobility. But the real dagger came from Canada's strategic redirection. By building trade bridges with South Korea, Germany, and even Japan, Ottawa insulated itself from US pressure. Washington couldn't lean on Canada the way it used to. Every time American negotiators demanded concessions, Canada could shrug and say, "Fine, we'll sell to Berlin, or Seoul, or Brussels." That's not defiance, it's power. And let's not forget the carbon politics. By positioning its nickel as the greenest in the game, Canada weaponized climate policy itself. The EU's border tax became Ottawa's sales pitch. South Korea's decarbonization targets became Canada's advantage. Even the Biden-era climate frameworks, which Trump tried to unwind, ended up giving Canada leverage. Because American companies now had to prove sustainability metrics without access to clean Canadian inputs. So where does Washington go from here? 3 choices remain, none of them good. Option 1, exempt Canada from the tariffs. Politically humiliating for Trump, but economically necessary. It would restore access to Sudbury's nickel, ease pressure on Detroit, and stabilize EV costs. But it would also look like a climb down, a concession to Trudeau after weeks of bluster. For Trump, whose brand thrives on never backing down, this option is almost toxic. The fallout is real. Pricier EVs, weaker sales, investors fleeing, and US consumers stuck with gas guzzlers. Meanwhile, Canada turns a trade war into a launch pad, securing its place in the multipolar future. The big question now, does Washington swallow its pride and backtrack, or double down and risk losing everything? If you want to keep following these power plays, the tariffs, the retaliation, the global energy chess game, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and ring that bell. Because this story isn't over, not by a long shot.